Welcome to our video on paint defect removal and polishing. We'll discuss some basics of polishing and how to remove a few specific paint defects. Usually when refinishing, we're trying to match the OEM finish that the vehicle had. Unfortunately, we sometimes wind up with runs, dust nibs, sags, or orange peel. We can correct these through some polishing processes. We want to make sure that we select products that are suitable for the job we're doing. In a body shop, we need polishes that are free of contaminants such as silicone. And we want to make sure that we have a polish that's going to work well with the product that we're polishing, for example, our clear coat, and make sure that it'll work well on fresh paint since we're often polishing products a few days after they've been painted. In addition to the polish, we have to make sure we also have compatible polishing pads. Here we see on the left a wool pad for aggressive polishing. It's not always necessary, only in very extreme circumstances. Then we have this white pad, which is a coarse pad, the black pad, a medium pad, and the blue pad, which is a very fine pad. Make sure that these are compatible with the polish that you're using in your system. Conventionally, an 8-inch polisher is used in the body shop, which is what we just saw with those foam pads. Here we see a 3-inch mini polisher, which is excellent for polishing very small areas or small parts. However, the mini polisher is not a suitable tool to use for large areas. A variable speed polisher is ideal, like this one here, which works from approximately 600 to 3500 RPM. However, most polishing should be done at 1700 RPM or less. A mill thickness gauge can be used before and after sanding and polishing to determine how much mill thickness there was available and how much you may have removed during those processes. Let's start off by removing these scuff marks in this black panel. We're going to do this by polishing. First off, let's apply some polish directly to our 8-inch polishing pad. Since it's a fresh pad, we want to load the pad and then manually spread the polish all over the panel so it doesn't spatter everywhere. We're going to start by polishing with low speed, making sure to try and keep the polisher fairly flat at approximately a 20-degree angle to the panel. Also watching the curve of the panel. And we're going to polish in a crosshatch pattern, meaning going both horizontal and vertical. Listen to the polisher here. It's running at the highest acceptable speed of approximately 1700 RPM. Since the polishing alone did not remove the defect, we're going to wet sand with 1500 and then 2000 grit sandpaper. Sometimes polishing alone will not remove the defect. As we have a look at this finished sanded area, we can see the orange peel in the outskirts circled in that orange area. And we can also see the remnants of a dust nib circled in blue. That dust nib should be sanded a little bit more to be fully removed, as the orange peel should also be sanded more if we were trying to remove the orange peel from the entire panel. That sanded area would then be polished with the first step compound, so the rubbing compound, with the white pad, which is appropriate in this system. Then we'd have to determine when to move to step 2, which is what we see in this photo here with the black pad. Usually we want to make sure that the first step removes all the coarse scratches from our sanding or from the defect, and that the panel is glossy. The second step is just to remove minor imperfections. We use the same method for applying the second step as we would the first, making sure to follow the contour of the panel. Notice how the edge and body line are taped to make sure that we are being careful not to burn through those with the polisher, and then we polish until we're happy with the results. Like all tasks in the body shop, we should start by cleaning the panel with a soapy water solution and then follow up with a wax and grease remover. The solvent cleaner will help remove any waxes, greases, or other contaminants on the panel. It should also be used on freshly painted surfaces. We want to then make sure that we are using an alcohol-based cleaner to clean between each of the polishing steps. This helps remove any filler material that may be left on the panel from the polish, as some polishes do contain fillers, which may give a false sense that the panel is indeed completely polished or the defect is removed. So clean between each step and before you're finished to double check your work. Now we're going to remove this sag, which wound up turning into a run during the drying process. This can be very challenging. If we're not careful, we can easily burn through during the sanding process, specifically burn through the two edges around the run, or we may not remove it completely, meaning that it will still be wavy when we're done and the customer may not be happy with that appearance. Always let the paint dry as long as possible. Usually the paint will stay gummy even after baking for several days. If possible, wait a week or longer to give yourself the best possible chance at removing the run safely. One of the best methods to remove a run is to either use a razor blade with the edges taped off or rounded, or a sharp file also with rounded edges. We are going to use one of those tools, whichever you prefer, to shave down the run. So in this video, you will see I have a razor blade that I've taped the edges on, and I'm keeping the razor blade perpendicular to the panel, shaving it. And as I shave it, you can see the clear coat coming off. This paint, fortunately, has been cured for quite a while, meaning it's nice and hard. If the paint had not been cured for a while, it would be very soft and gummy and would not shave off as nicely as what we're seeing. We're going to keep shaving over that area until it gets flatter and flatter, so I can keep feeling it to see if I feel a hump. We're also looking to see if the area appears wider and wider as I'm shaving it. The wider it gets, the flatter the run will be, and we'll see that as we continue watching this video here. So we have to make sure that we're checking these runs constantly as we're shaving them down to make sure they are getting flatter the way we want. We want to make sure that we are taking long strokes over the whole area, the whole sag, to make sure it comes down evenly. We are only working on specific sections, doing shorter strokes, if we notice that there's a troubled spot, such as a head of a run which was taller than the area around it. So make sure that you're constantly checking, constantly feeling those areas. As we're shaving this, we should be seeing again that whole area to open up wider and wider, and that's that light colored area we're seeing where we're shaving. That should continually get bigger and bigger until it gets flatter and flatter, and we're no longer feeling or seeing any remnants of a run remaining in that area. Once we're happy with the way it's both looking and the way it's feeling, then we can consider proceeding to a blocking stage. We want to get about 95% of the run out with the shaving process, and the last 5% approximately with a sanding process. And we'll sand with an appropriate paper as we see fit, and that may be as coarse as 800 or 1000 grit, following the 100 grit rule or the next step rule, moving up from 800 to 1000, 1000 to 1200, 1200 to 1500, and then finishing off with 2000 or 3000 grit sandpaper. If we follow those steps and flatten this run out correctly, we will wind up with very good results saving the run. Again, check the run constantly. If we wind up burning through, you will see color, whatever color the panel was, since this is base coat, clear coat, and that may appear either in the shaving process, the sanding process, or the polishing process. So keep an eye out for those color changes. If you do wind up burning through, of course, that will be a redo. The panel will have to be repainted. The other concern, of course, is mill thickness. As we thin this out, will there be enough clear coat left to protect the panel? Again, ideally we want to see about 1.8 to 2.5 mils of clear coat left on top of the base coat to provide proper UV protection. Here I'm blocking with an X pattern similar to when blocking bodywork or primer surfacer. The idea is using the X pattern, which helps keep the repair area straight, since this is a crown panel. We want to make sure that we're going over the entire repair area, constantly feeling and checking. Since I'm using wet sanding paper, keep the area wet, and you can add a drop of soap to the water to help lubricate it. As we're sanding this, keep an eye to make sure we're not burning through or going too far, and follow that stage sanding process going through the grits. Only go as coarse as necessary, but remember the coarser grits, like any other sanding process, will always cut straighter. Then we're going to finish by working up to our fine grits, our 2000, and I'd make sure you finish at least 2000 grit, if not finer, at that 3000 stage. The 2000 finer stages can be done by hand without a block, but if you are blocking, make sure that you use an appropriate sized block. Here I'm using a rubber sanding block. You could also use a piece of wood, especially for a smaller run in a small inconspicuous area. A piece of wood may work better than a larger sanding block. And here, as we're sanding and we go up through the grits, there will be a little bit of sheen, so we can use the light to our advantage to see if we can still see a shadow of that run. If so, we'll go back and continue blocking that area. If we're happy with it, then we can proceed to the polishing stage as we saw earlier in the video. Remember that when you are sanding by hand without a block, to keep the sandpaper in the center of your hand and use as much of your hand as possible. Avoid your fingers only, or we will put finger lines or marks in the panel. Always try to sand by hand in the direction of sight or line of sight, which is usually the horizon. And we want to make sure that as we're doing this, we're not putting too much pressure on the panel and the panel staying clean and lubricated. If you get a piece of dirt in there, you will accidentally scratch the panel and you may not get that deep scratch out. Here again, we are trying to sand within that line of sight, making sure that we are getting rid of any of the coarser scratches from the blocking. Keep in mind that any hand sanding with this process will not level. This will not remove the run. This will only glide over what's on the panel and refine any of the coarser scratches from the blocking stage. If we were using the X pattern before, any X pattern scratches that are still visual after this are a sign of scratches that need to be removed with the finer grit sandpaper. Keep going on this until you can dry the panel, and when the panel's dry and you have a little bit of sheen, it looks good. There's no sign of the run left, and there's no sign of those scratches left or those X scratches in the panel. Let's watch this panel being polished in real time. So again, start off by applying the polish directly to the pad, and then while the polisher is off, manually spread it around to prevent splattering. Then what we want to do is start the polisher on the lowest speed possible and then slowly bring the speed up to prevent more material from splattering off. Then we're going to move the polisher over the panel, moving in the two directions for the crosshatch, so up and down and then side to side, so the horizontal and the vertical. Keep that polisher moving so we're not building up too much heat in any one spot. If we build up too much heat, what can happen is we can burn the paint. And if we burn the paint, you will see discoloration and or you may see very deep scratches that you might not be able to remove from the paint. If we are polishing with this and we see that the polish is still wet, we can keep polishing that panel. But if we see the polish start to dry, we must stop, clean the panel, and if necessary, reapply more polish. If you try to polish the panel dry, what can happen is excessive heat will build up and any of the dried polish that is on the panel could actually wind up getting stuck in the polishing pad and scratching the panel, putting in a whole bunch of small scratches in the area that you've been working on, which of course defeats the purpose of polishing altogether. So we'll go over this panel several times in the crosshatch pattern, making sure that we have tight overlap. We're holding the panel or polisher against the panel at approximately a 20-degree angle. We can see that here right now. Going over again, tight overlap, making sure again that polish stays wet. As we're doing this, we're going to make sure that we get the entire area side to side, edge to edge, if we've sanded those areas. Here we've wiped it off and we can see the final result, and that is just with stage 1. And because I don't see any scratches anymore, this would be suitable to move on to stage 2. If you're not working on standalone parts, make sure that the vehicle is masked off. So here we've masked off any areas we do not want to get polish splatter, especially textured plastics and other sensitive substrates. We've also masked off this washer nozzle. If we're not to mask off the washer nozzle, the polisher will hit it and either polish up or damage that piece. Even with a good masking job, always check jams in other areas for splatter when you're done polishing. Jams are very bad for this. Make sure to wipe them out. You may need the alcohol mixture that you used earlier to remove it, or a mixture of ammonia and water may work well too. Here we see an aggressive wool pad which was used on the edge of this hood. It wound up burning through, which is what we're seeing in the corner of the hood, the gray color, where we've actually polished all the way down to the primer. You'll also see the pad has a red color where we can see the base coat on the pad, and this area unfortunately had polish that was put onto the textured plastic, which means we may need to replace the cowl. There are other plastic components on the car that can be polished, such as this bug deflector. Here we can see the half that was polished and the half that wasn't. And you can see that a little bit of polish work makes a big difference. The same technique can be applied to headlights, which are also plastic. This is using the same polishing techniques and sanding techniques that you'd use on the clear coat on a vehicle. To determine if a scratch will actually sand or polish out, run your fingernail through it. If this scratch happens to catch your fingernail, then it's probably too deep to be sanded out and should probably be refinished. Thanks for watching this polishing video. Best of luck with your future polishing.